This episode contains mention of suicide. If you or someone you love is struggling, call the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988. Hello, and welcome to All the Grief, a weekly podcast for all those who have been touched by grief. We are your hosts. I am Rebecca Luttrell.
And I'm Andrea Giron-Mathern.
We are two friends, a therapist and a social scientist, both highly sensitive fellow grievers, here to share our hearts as we talk about all the grief. Hello, and welcome to this episode of All the Grief. Today we're going to talk about holiday grief, and we have a special guest that we're going to introduce in a little bit. But first, I want to check in. Good morning, Andrea.
Good morning, Rebecca. How are you?
I'm good. I want to just check in before we start our conversation and see how you're doing. I know you've been in a lot of grief this past few weeks.
Yeah, it's been such a rough month, basically since we launched. The day before our launch party, my cousin suddenly passed away, who I was pretty close with. Followed exactly 10 days later by my grandmother, whose side I was by, holding her hand when she passed. And then my cousin's stepdad, who was just such a light in our family, passed away from ALS just a few days after my grandmother, I think in the week after my grandmother. It's all such a blur, to have those three consecutively right after each other, and very different losses. So I've been to the breaking point where my body I felt sick and thought I was getting the flu, and realized I'm just so overwhelmed right now. And it's you don't even have time to integrate one passing before you're in this shocking grief of the next. And so it's been really huge. But my grandmother's funeral was on Tuesday, and that felt like a kind of culmination, or a little bit of weight was taken off me just to have had that happen. It was also complicated. So we were all going to fly out to my cousin's funeral in North Carolina. I had my ticket, and my grandmother just was really sick, and I just couldn't go. So I asked everybody's permission and made sure it was okay that I stayed. I didn't want them to think that I didn't want to be there for my aunt and to honor my cousin, but I couldn't leave her. And so we had some conversation, was it going to be my brother or I, and decided my brother should be the one to go. Just that felt like the more important support there. They were also very, very close as kids. And so my grandmother passed the day before my cousin's funeral. I don't know. It's all such a whirlwind of dates. And I immediately, my sister called everyone on the phone, but then they needed to get off and attend to my aunt's grief and honor my cousin. And so I was sort of left alone with this thing that had never happened. I've never seen a person die, and was sitting with her body. I learned so many things.
Yeah.
But I think one of the biggest lessons was I had associated death with a sudden kind of violent, painful thing, right? My cousin's death was very sudden and shocking and jarring. My father's death was sudden and shocking and jarring. And I had listened to this podcast, and they were talking about death, and everybody's like, I want to pass in my sleep, quietly in my sleep. And the guest was like, I don't think that happens. Our body shuts down, and that's a violent thing. So I think it's a pretty jarring, violent thing. So I was really preparing myself. I just wanted to know what to expect. And so I was trying to call hospice, and I have a bunch of aunties who are nurses. I was like, just help me know what to look for in these next 48 hours. And I actually didn't see any of the things that they told me was going to happen, but I could feel it. I just knew the end was super, super near. And it was so gentle, Rebecca. It was so peaceful and gentle. There was a moment of discomfort, probably about 48 hours before she passed, where she was you could see she was uncomfortable in her bed, and she couldn't really be touched because just her nerve endings were all sort of frayed. But then it was slow, and it was peaceful, and it was what you would want for somebody that you just love with all your heart, and just gave me a sense of peace. There are some deaths that are sudden and violent and awful, and there are deaths that are slow and peaceful. And I remember coming home. I would come home to feed the boys and put them to bed, and then I'd go back to her. And I was talking to my husband about how she had stopped eating and drinking, and if I even put water on her lips, she would freak out. And he was like, well, can't they give her an IV? And I was like, she's 96. Like,
Yeah.
we're not doing any medical intervention. And it just, watching her pass, I think solidified my own ideas of not wanting to have a medical passing if I ever got the chance, like not wanting to die in a hospital,
Yeah.
because her body was working hard to shut down, and putting anything else in it would have made it harder. And so it was, I don't know, I learned so much, and I'm able now to kind of see the beauty of it. And as I was sitting there with her body after she had passed for 5 hours by myself, I just kept thinking of the Jewish tradition of sitting Shiva.
Mhm.
And I was like, this is my last act of like love for her, to be able to sit with her by her side, as whatever's happening, with the soul part of it. But like, this is what I have to do.
Yeah.
And this is my last like real demonstration of love for her. So it was really hard, but I got through it. And I feel like on the journey now to like integrating these three losses and understanding them on three super different levels.
Yeah. And we've been in touch as you've been going through each of these, and I feel really tearful and emotional right now in this way of such a beautiful moment between the two of you. And that I had this feeling when you said, I'm staying, and I'm staying by my grandmother's bedside, and you didn't go to the other funeral. And I was just thinking, like, God, I hope I have a granddaughter like you one day who just sits with me, right? Yeah, it just really touched me. And I thought, I think that we all could honestly hold that wish, that we could go peacefully, that we could live a long life.
Yeah.
And then I want someone by my side who can just hold that space and be with me. It would be such a beautiful gift.
I think I'm there. At first, I was like, and there was
Yeah.
like, their staff were amazing and gave me so much room and were like feeding me. They're like, you haven't eaten. Like, they were just taking such good care of me. And I
Yeah.
remember trying to hold it because I was like, I don't want my fear or sadness to keep her here.
Yeah.
So I remember being like, you'll have your moment to like
Mhm.
cry your eyeballs out when there's
Right.
at the point of no return. But until then, like, you just need to be telling her how much you love her. And I do want to say, I was all by myself in the room, but my sister, as I realized I was in the final, what felt like moments, I said, please. I had my rosary with me. My grandma was super Catholic, but I didn't know how to pray the rosary. So I'm like, can you look up how you pray the rosary?
Oh.
Because I feel like I should pray the rosary and tell all the siblings to pray the rosary with me. And she just FaceTimed me.
Aw.
And so she was
She
there
showed up.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I love that. So
Yeah.
thanks. Thanks for being there through all those text messages. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm at another funeral today. What are you doing?
I know. I know. I'm like, gosh, I'm hoping for some space now to just like process all of that for you, and to get like a break from the place of grief that has just been one grief happening after another,
Yeah.
which that is really intense within 3 weeks. And it's like, I always tell my sort of backstory of grief as these three events, but they happened over the span of a year and a half. And that didn't even feel like enough space to
Right.
process any one grief. And so, yeah, I just really honor that this is where you are and that you're showing up to do this. And I know you'll have things specifically to say about holiday too. I'll check in briefly. I've been in a season of a lot of work, which is not my first place that I spend most of my life. I'm like, I like hanging out in emotion. I don't want to hang out and work. And so I've been doing a lot of work, which has been keeping me busy, but I can feel, and I don't know if we've recorded since we launched. Maybe we did
Well, we
one.
did one,
We
but
did
then
one
it
and it
got
was
messed up.
garbage. Yeah. The sound was terrible. But I have had several people, so you included, but several people who've had significant losses in this last few
Mm,
weeks. And I always feel aware because my dad passed, I think, a week
yeah.
after Thanksgiving. And I know that, the statistics are more people pass this time of year.
Mm,
And, sometimes we'll say, oh, because there's more drunk driving accidents. But
mm,
it's really interesting. I think that a lot of people make a transition this time of year, and it's not related to the holidays as much as it's winter has that quality of death and passing and transition, and people die in all
mm.
sorts of ways. And then we have these celebratory holidays in the middle of a time when most people die, or when the most
Wow.
people leave earth. So it's just so wild to me. So I've kind of been in somewhat of a bubble of just like, okay, I'm doing all this work. and then feeling the grief of the people around me who were losing really significant loved ones and trying to just stay here, both in my heart and in the work, not completely
Mm.
distracting by work. But it was like, I'm so afraid I'm going to forget someone. Like, I feel like I want to keep checking in on people. Like, how are you doing? I know you're with your family this weekend. How's that going? And I'm like, did I remember everyone? Like, that's the only thing that matters to me. I don't want anyone to
Wow.
feel dropped in their grief, and that I'm in a moment where I'm not having any specific grief or death. And so I can show up more where other people are. And I
Mm.
don't want to drop anyone in that place. So yeah, that's sort of it for my check in. So now we have our first guest, and I want to introduce our guest. And I know I'm going to not even do enough justice to who this human is to me in my life and who she is in the world. So I'll give it a shot, and maybe I'll say more in the show notes or something. I'll just add pieces. But
We can put her official bio in the show notes. This is your like heart bio of her.
yeah, this is my heart bio. And
Oh,
yeah, and I think like there's so many great things that Sandra's up to, and I want people to be able to find those things if they're interested in learning more. But anyway, today we're interviewing my dear friend Sandra Traganos. So Sandra and I met when we were pregnant. Our daughters are born a month apart, and my daughter's dad worked with her and wanted us to meet, and so we met. And I mean, Sandra just has, I'm gonna cry. The kind of soul, like just such a everyone is my friend, this like welcoming soul that is just love and love and love, and was so generous and eager to share with me all the pieces of her world and her journey. And I just immediately felt ease and comfort with her and watched her transition. So at the time that I met her, she was like an accountant or something like that, something real businessy. And she was just like, you know what? I'm a witch, actually. And she just started
I
like
feel that.
cultivating all of just these soul practices. And it was just so much fun to, have our girls play together. We lived near each other at the time, well, near-ish in the state of Colorado together at the time. And so we could make these play dates and do all the things and talk about all the things. And she's also a homeschooling mom. And she is like, if I had to just say one thing about how I see Sandra, it's like I'm just complaining, right? About how like I usually like to dwell in emotion and like swim in the world of emotion, and work is like, please don't bother me. I don't want to have to do anything. Sandra is this person who incredibly holds this capacity to do so much shit. It exhausts me to even hear about an hour of her morning. I'm like, that was your whole day you just described, right? She's like, no, that's what I did from 7 to 8. She can do so much, and she has the biggest fucking heart, just is such a feeler, and can somehow make space for like, oh, I'm in the grief and I'm in this feeling, and I'm just gonna feel it so fully and love so fully in that. And then I'm also gonna build a chicken coop and tend to the animals. And then like, oh, one of our sweet chickens died, we're gonna have a funeral pyre, and we're gonna, it's just happening and happening. And so I just idolize her. So she recently moved to Tennessee with her family, and they're just starting from scratch, kind of building a homestead. Like, it's so easy, but actually it looks exhausting. But she's doing that with her husband, who's a veteran, and her daughter. And she created, so part of why we're going to be talking today is about holiday grief. And I know I mentioned on the front end before the episode started that this is an episode that's going to include talk about suicide. But her stepson, Jaden, who died by suicide when he was 13. And so Sandra had a lot of grief before that in her life. And we were friends when this happened. I remember the day still, and still feel so tenderhearted when I think about it. And Sandra was such a model for just honoring her whole process of the grief of that loss and creating meaning out of his life. And she created Jaden's Place, which is a nonprofit and a place to support children. She's working on right now a concierge campsite so that it's going to help families to reconnect with one another in nature. But the camp is going to be for kids navigating grief and other mental wellness struggles. And in addition to that, like, as if you could imagine deciding to start a campsite, moving to a new state, having all this land that you basically have to cultivate and keep wild, and it's like a lot of acres. And then grow things on it, and it's a whole new terrain and climate than where you were coming from. She also just happens to be the owner and operator of holistic health consulting called Mama Sana and Leaf of Earth Apothecary. She's the person that I run to every time. I'm like, my daughter has this illness. How do I support her? She just knows everything about herbal treatment and natural treatment and ways of being with that, the experience of life in this really natural and supportive way. And there's so much more I could say, but these are sort of like the broad strokes of who Sandra is. So welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me here. That was quite the intro. I love
It's
it.
beautiful. So well deserved.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. You're just so precious to me. So before we like launch into your story, I just want to check in with your heart and how you are in this moment this morning.
I'm feeling pretty good today. It's kind of tenderhearted a little bit. It's the time of
Mm.
year, right around October until the beginning of the year. I just feel a little softer in life. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we had you here today. I mean, definitely. I know this time of year is just hard in general with grief, and you can have a loss at any time of year, and you get to the holidays, and even if it happened in the summer, the holidays bring up, oh, this was a time that had some connection with that person and can be really hard. And then I thought of you for this episode because I remember that Jaden died in October. I remembered it was really close to the holidays, and then I didn't remember. I was like, oh, what were those first holidays like? And so I just wanted to open a conversation with you to sort of bring in different perspectives and different ways that that felt. And so I'm going to just let you start to tell your story, and you can definitely just bring in the pieces that were like the grief you already were holding at the time that you lost Jaden.
We spoke to this a little bit earlier. I was speaking to my husband about it this morning as well, and how grief feels kind of like the one consistent thing throughout my whole life, as far back as I can remember. Grief and I have been holding hands, and with each death, each one is so different, and our processes are different. And I was already holding a lot by the time we lost Jaden, and I think it was the first loss that I've had that I really wanted to be more aware during the journey after that. I had lost my best friend Marissa years before to suicide as well. I looked back on it on all the ways that I really didn't honor her or myself. And it was an awful time. It was an awful thing that happened and awful years after it. And I didn't think I could survive that again and going through that. I couldn't survive myself trying to self medicate and do all the things to just get through the next day. So when we lost Jade in anticipation of the holidays, I wanted to create more of a balance in our world. There was so much darkness and so much sad, and the holidays almost felt like an opportunity where it would be okay to bring some light back into our lives. When you're deep in that acute grief, it's always questioned like how it looked on the outside at times, if that makes sense. You want to make other people comfortable around you. It got kind of we started isolating a bit more because you're just so worried about the community, friends and family, and the platitudes that are coming, not to grieve, to kind of overlook what's happening. And it was more about everybody else. But then the holidays felt like a time where it could be really about us again. It felt so hard bringing in like light and like happiness because we were grieving, and you're just in this weird place where you're like craving light. At least for me, I was like, there's so much darkness and this is so hard to hold, and I needed some type of balance. And within the holidays, it was that opportunity where I felt like it was okay to do that. Like it was okay to put up Christmas lights, and it was okay for us to laugh again because it's the holidays. But yeah, I just took like it was a full mission. I just wanted to be like the fairy of Christmas lights and gifts. And I just wanted that moment of where you see all of it, and just for that split second, it would be like Jaden was still there. It wouldn't be so caught up in the thought that he wasn't there. Although there's a million times, while setting up, I remember crying for like an hour and a half over his Christmas stocking and whether or not I should put it up on the mantle.
Yeah.
And then realizing that was its place, and just because he wasn't with us, that was still his stocking, and it was still its spot, and it was always going to go there. And I started writing a list of things that I could stuff it with. But So we had traditions that we had before, but we didn't really hold steadfast to them. And they just didn't mean quite as much. And it was like, oh, this is just a thing we do. There wasn't a whole lot of thought in it. And then after his death, it was like, these are the things we do, and this is why we do them. And the ways that we could incorporate him to always be there. Like, what were the parts of the holidays that Jaden loved the most? He loved the Christmas lights, and he loved the ornate presents that I would wrap. Like, he always got a kick out of it. I'd put little chocolates in the bows or race cars or whatever, and he'd always kind of tease me about it. So I was like, every gift under this tree will have some ornate ridiculousness on it, and it just became about those little details and the little ways that I could always keep him with us. In subsequent years, it became a bit more bittersweet, I think, where it wasn't so cute. So it sits differently each year. You think the first one's going to be the harder, but that really wasn't my experience. That first year, I barely remember. I just remember wrapping presents and lots of Christmas lights. I mean, our house went from a couple of strings one year to like 10,000 of them the next year, and the neighbors are like, what is going on here? I'm going to write joy in 12-foot letters on my front yard, because that's what I want to try to call in this time of like incredible darkness and sadness. And it was for me all about like trying to balance out the dark with all the ways that I could bring in light. And, Christmas is full of light. So it was a good opportunity to light it up.
Literally.
Totally. Well, and so I'm thinking, like, in that first year, like you're naming, it's kind of a blur. You don't totally remember. You're in acute grief. And your daughter, Nalani, was how old?
Nalani was about 2.5 by the time, about
Yeah.
Christmas time.
Yeah. And so I'm just imagining, and I know it's probably hard to remember because we're in the fog of grief, but like having this little one who is just coming into awareness of sort of the holidays are something, and like there's these traditions or there are these pieces, and how you were holding both, because I know you to be someone who's like, oh, I'm honoring my grief if it's here. And then having this little one who doesn't have the same relationship to grief at that age and sort of is probably a little bit in the space of magic and wonder of Christmas. And now, like, her brother isn't here and having to explain that. Just wondering what you remember from that time.
I just remember wanting to express my feelings as authentically as I possibly could. I remember after my dad died, when I was a few years older than Nalani was, crying wasn't kind of allowed in our household. It was a waste of time, and you just move on to the business of things. And later on, like, that ideology just, it didn't serve me well at all. So I wanted her to know that it was okay to cry. It was okay in those moments to feel all the things, and to be able to bear witness to me feeling my sadness, and then to also seeing me come up from that place, and then to feel the joy again, and to know that we could oscillate back and forth between those places. We are incredible beings that can hold these paradoxical places in the exact same moment. And I can be so brokenhearted and missing Jaden, and I can also be so joyful that I have the holidays to celebrate with my family and get to see everybody that we have, and to share that grief, and just to have faith in her own body, that her brain and her body was going to protect her in all the ways that it needed to in those moments, that it wouldn't be in its full shebangy. That's a terrible word, but it's kind of a good one.
It's an onomatopoeia. Those are helpful.
Yeah, it's a good one. But that we can all embrace these places all at once, and just to have faith in her body and in the process, that if you're just feeling the things, that you can come out of it, and you can feel the good things again too. I had experienced this kind of disconnect with joy after Marissa died, trying so hard not to feel any of the grief, not feeling any of the hurt, that I disconnected from my ability to feel all the good stuff, and ended up in this really kind of self-destructive monotone space that was just awful. And I didn't want to experience that for myself or for her or for our oldest son, Austin. I wanted to try to model grief in the best possible way I could. And again, the holidays just seems like an opportunity to be able to shift back and forth from those places of deep grief and sadness, and then these incredible moments of joy as well. So that's the big piece that I remember with both of the kids, and just Be like, whatever you're feeling is okay. Like, let it come. And we can all be sitting around the dinner table laughing and having this moment. And if any one of us feels that we need to have tears, like, there's room for that.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone is welcome to come as they are.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what I wanted to develop over the holidays. Just come as you are.
God, I love this. I love this because I think there's so many ways to do the holidays, and I think like to offer to everyone listening, there's no one right way. So don't get too caught up in being like, oh my God, Sandra's doing it the right way and I'm doing it the wrong way. There's no one right way. And
Sandra's doing it the Sandra way. Yeah.
That's right. You got to do it your own way.
yeah, it's this piece where when I'm listening to you, I feel my whole nervous system relax. And I think that there's something around, I mean, that it's so appropriate that you named your holistic health Mama Sana, because you have this mama energy in a way that I'm like, God, this is the mama that like I need it, where it's like, oh, you can be sad in a moment that we're all happy and we can hold that too. And that there's not a pressure to be one way because, yes, I have this giant joy on the front lawn and we can sit here for an hour and a half or 2 hours and cry about the heartbreak of what do we do with Jaden's stocking. And we're just going to try to figure it out by feeling our way and then arriving at the wisdom of, I know what we're doing. This is what feels right, and finding your way in that. I really.
Yeah. I think to expound on that too, listening, one of the things that I heard, and that as we've come together for these funerals in our family, the cousins have sort of reconnected. You know, I think when my parents grew up, everybody kind of stayed close. People just didn't move. I mean, I think it's a generational thing. And my generation, we've all moved. You know, I have a cousin in Oregon, a cousin, you know, my sister's in Minnesota. I have a cousin, you know, who was in North Carolina, a cousin in California. And it was this moment where we all came together, and some of the conversations were about, the topic was like family secrets, but it really was about how our family chose to have grief, which was really around like the funeral is your time to grieve. And then we never speak about it again. And so listening to you talk about like, you don't cry, that's a waste of time. Ours was, why are you crying? I can give you a reason to cry kind of thing, you know,
Exactly.
Right.
you know? But listening to all the cousins and how I was so much more like you, Sandra, like I couldn't. I was like, I can't hold this in. So y'all are going to be laughing and then suddenly I'm going to be crying and you're just going to need to roll with me because it's either that or I got to go be in my room by myself all the time. And so I love this sort of energy of kind of a reclamation of understanding what bottling our grief did as young people, or watching how our family bottled really important grief. My oldest uncle, so my grandma's first son, passed away the year before I was born. And I almost know nothing about him. We very rarely talk about him. And that was because it made my grandma so sad. And I'm like, but I promise you, she was sad all the time about him and now doesn't have anybody to talk about him with. And so just thinking about how bottling up that grief we either experienced or saw, the way that that impacted either through self-medication or through an inability to create deep emotional connections with each other, and how we're saying that stops here. I am going to do that differently by grieving in a way that allows for the full spectrum. And it is such a spectrum. So that really hit home for me.
I want to just take a moment, Andrea, and check in with you about the holidays this year. Like, are you doing things different because this just happened and the holidays are right in front of us? And yeah, has something shifted for you, or where are you?
This was like, I think like the universe gives you the right medicine right when you need it. So Sandra's my medicine right when I needed it. And, you know, Rebecca and I talk all the time, so she knows so much of this. But I agree that first year after my dad died, getting through the holidays, I think we did it. He loved Thanksgiving, was his favorite, because there were no presents. There was no commercialization of Thanksgiving, and there was like a shit ton of food. So he was like, why would we do anything else than celebrate like this? And I remember that first Thanksgiving being fucking heart-wrenching, because he would have us stand up in a big circle and everybody went around and said what they were thankful for. And I mean, there were tears, there were laughter. It was just such a beautiful thing. And I'm sure like this uneasiness, because we're a huge family, so we would start it right before we ate, and then it would be like an hour later we would finally get to eat this food we'd been smelling, you know? So it was like there was like this begrudging, like, Dad, we need a buzzer. Yes. And so there was this lighthearted, like, oh man, but we all really loved it. And so I remember that first year, it was just a fucking shit show. It was just everybody like, I mean, you couldn't have understood
Yeah.
any words anyone said. And so to think about our Thanksgiving table without my dad and without my grandma, I was just like, there is no way. And I was the only girl cousin in the state. And being a very, in some ways, traditional Latino family, the boys don't get asked to do shit, like they're like, I mean, it's like, Andre, can you make sure that they're at the funeral and that they're wearing this and that? And I'm like, they are grown ass men. But yes, I will.
Czech families run the same, apparently.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. And so I was really mired in the logistics of her funeral arrangements and also living with this, having watched somebody that you love die. It was a lot. And I was like, I cannot set placemats. I cannot do the logistics of a Thanksgiving holiday. And so I kept being back and forth and I would drop hints like, hey, y'all, I don't know if I'm going to host Thanksgiving this year. And then I just decided not to. I was like, I'm going to go to the mountains. We have a place in the mountains. There's nobody around. I'm going to be with my little family, and that's what I need. And it was really hard for me because I love my family. We have very deep traditions, and to voluntarily pull out of it felt selfish, and I have to be okay with that selfishness right now. And I've also committed to Christmas. I'm also like, and I don't think I can do two in a row. Yeah, so listening to you, I can think about Christmas as the both and, thinking about it as the joy of I remember one Christmas watching Miss Doubtfire in the theater with my grandma, and she had this contagious laugh that set the whole movie theater laughing because of her. And Robin Williams is pretty funny, but her laugh was so outrageously contagious. And so I can think maybe we watch that or something that brings those two pieces together, that is that bittersweet, that allows us to feel all the joy and magic and wonder that for me is Christmas. I think, like you're saying, Sandra, for you as well, but also creates space for we lost our matriarch. And we don't have somebody to step into that role in my family. And that feels really heartbreaking to me. So to think about, and I think I've been experiencing this, the family dynamics that change after a death. And ours really have shifted since my dad passed. And now, knowing they're going to shift further with the loss of my grandma, I'm sort of preparing for what's that new family dynamic going to be like? And I'm grieving that already.
Yeah.
There's so many, not necessarily smaller griefs, but those moments, those pieces that you don't realize when you have the first loss. Everyone thinks it's just that moment and that person and
right.
that instance. But really, the hardest part of it for me has been every day after. It's seeing his bike in the garage and knowing that he's never going to ride it again, right? It's seeing his seat at the table. It's all those moments that just make it so much harder. It's not just that one day. It's all of the expectations and the plans for the future that you grieve as well as you're going through it. And yeah, holding space for it and seeing what it's going to evolve into. For me, I had a lot of anxiety around that. I hate not knowing, right? I like to control things a little bit. What direction are we going?
Yeah, making space for the unknown. And that can be so hard. But I feel like one of the biggest learnings in my life was learning to sit with that, because I think that I was really more controlling than I thought I was before I had 3 back-to-back tragedies. And I was just like, oh yeah, I've got this shit. I understand life and I can do life. And then it was just getting the wind knocked out of you repeatedly. And you learn this truth about life, which is that story you had about control, it's just a story. And it was at a time when everything was going easy. And then when things really get shaken up, you realize oh, it's so unpredictable. And we somehow have enough safety that we live in from a place of anxiety and fear and wanting control, that we have created this room full of cushions, and then nothing's going to happen. And then life still keeps happening. And then you kind of come into that awakening in the moment of grief where you're like, oh, this is actually what we're doing here. This is life. We're mortal. Things are unpredictable. And so how do I be with that? And kind of know that I don't have control. And then in this moment, I can just be present to maybe I have a little bit of control in this moment. How am I celebrating the holidays? What am I doing for myself? And I know that this could completely get disrupted. Feels true for me. And I'll just quickly share my piece around my dad. But when he lost him, Thanksgiving, I wasn't there. So I've talked about this before on our podcast, but I was talking to my brother on the phone, and I was like in a place with my dad where I was really agitated with him, and I could hear him in the background. And I was just like, no part of me was going to say, let me talk to him or say hi or say happy Thanksgiving. I was just like, I'm going to talk to my brother. If he doesn't ask and my dad doesn't ask, like, I'm getting off the phone. And then I think within a week, I don't remember the exact date, but I know it was at least a week after Thanksgiving, he died. And it was so shocking to my system. So I held this guilt, like I had done it wrong. And then I didn't have anything to wear to the funeral. So I had to go to the fucking mall when everything is just joy, love, celebration, Christmas lights, garish. And I'm like searching for something black that's nice enough for a church funeral situation. And I'm like, this is so fucking surreal. And then we went to his funeral. And so we had this holiday, this tradition that we would every Christmas Eve go to my dad's house. And so his family had this big Christmas Eve thing. There was always shrimp dip on Ritz crackers, which was like the staple that my aunt made. Like, so we had this whole thing that we would do every Christmas Eve, and then we would do Christmas with my mom. And so his funeral was at a funeral home near his house, and it was a part of town that I only went to because he lived really far out from where my mom lived. So I only went there to visit him. It wasn't where I would, because my mom had primary custody of us. And so, and at this point I'm an adult, but it was like that feeling of, it feels like we're going to do Christmas Eve. And what we're doing is we're saying goodbye and we're going to a funeral home. And it was just like such a weird thing how there was this nostalgia in my system that wanted one reality to be happening, but I was like having another reality in this same place. And then I've talked about, he had an open casket funeral. He just looked so happy and peaceful, like in the casket, in this way that I thought, he even had this kind of prankster way, and it looked like almost a smirk on his face. Like I was like, oh, he's just kidding. Like he's going to just sit up. And it was like this whole piece trying to reconcile what was happening with what I wanted to be happening. And at just a time of year where there were all these expectations and this just sort of this vibe, this nostalgia, this feeling inside of me that was really struggling to know that we were saying goodbye to Christmas in that form. And we would still come together on Christmas Eve. We'd still have shrimp dip, and my aunt has since passed. My cousin is holding up the shrimp dip tradition, and so like it was like we still ended up doing that in years to come, but just really feeling like, oh, it's that way that grief is like, this is your new relationship with that person, and they're not here anymore.
I remember one of the most impactful things somebody told me. It was my therapist after Jaden passed. I was really struggling with, like, what do I do with my love, with this energy, with all of these like pieces of me that are Jaden's. Like I don't want to rehome those pieces to somebody, like that's his. And she turned to me and was like, well, he's still your son. That's never going to go away. Your relationship with him, it's different now. It's obviously not one that we ever wanted in this capacity, or it's not the way that I want it to look. And I can be pissed about that, and Lord knows there's lots of days I am, but it's really a matter of just like accepting that my son, like I have a soul son now, and what is parenting him going to look like? I still get to be his mom, still get to have a relationship with him. It's not the one that I wanted. I would give anything to have the one we had before, but ultimately it is what it is, and I can accept that, and I can make conscious efforts into like maintaining that relationship. And so that kind of became my focus, and being like, he's still a part of our family, and we are still a family. Jaden's in spirit form now, and yeah, we'll just find ways to make his presence always be here with us. And So it was hard the first few years. He still has his seat at the table. That's every holiday. He has his seat. First year, actually plated his food and set it down. Was like, no, this is just a little too weird. He gets an empty plate, and I have a heart crystal that I put in the center of it. Because it couldn't be an empty plate. That just felt too sad.
Yeah.
But yeah, just finding those ways where he could still be part of things. And now, as the years have gone by, it's a little more bittersweet, where it's like, oh, I love that you're still here with us in the ways that you can be, but my heart is still so sad that you're not here in the ways that we want you to be.
Yeah. How old would Jaden be?
He'd be 20 this year.
Yeah.
Or he turned 20 this year.
20.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So 21, going to the bars next June.
You can set out, a beer for him at 21 if you want. Like, I'm just saying.
Oh, you know this.
I know
It
you
is
do
happening.
And so, like, I feel like you've given us so much around and answered so many questions that I might have asked in unfolding your story. And then I feel curious at this point where you're like 8 years into this and you're kind of saying the traditions. I'm just curious, do the holidays feel different than any other time of year? Is there more grief? Is there more connection with Jaden? Like, what do you notice?
My grief is more prevalent during those times for sure, because of the traditions that we've set up. His place at the table. It's just more visual reminders of it. Whereas normally we go through our day to day, and I hike through his memorial every day, and I have a few words with him. It's kind of more in your face during that time, isn't it? Right? We're all together, and it's family, and all of that is really beautiful and wonderful, and just lights up my soul in an incredible way. And Jaden's physical form isn't there, right? So it's both. You just find a way to, like, this is the hand for joy and this is the hand for grief, and we walk through with both of them full. And it's always been there. It just feels a little more balanced these days than before. And we've been blessed that we haven't had too many catastrophic losses since then. I lost a good friend this May. But it's a little different when you're living inside each other's pockets and you're around all the time, as opposed to, friends that you communicate with on a semi-regular basis. So it'll be interesting well, actually, I take that back. We had a miscarriage a few years ago, and that was in December as well. It seems to be my miscarriage month. We lost our twins in December, a few years before we lost Jaden as well. So December's a rough one. There are some days where, we'll plan lofty things. Oh, we're doing cookies today and it's going to be wonderful, and all the kids come and all the things. And I've woken up on that morning and just been like, I can't today. Like, and it's okay. I don't have the bandwidth. I don't have the capacity to do it. Like, today just needs to be a day for me, and to go inward and kind of feel all the things I need to feel. And we can have cookie day next week. It's just being more flexible with stuff and recognizing, like, yeah, I have these ambitions to do this, and they're traditions and things that we're going to keep maintaining, but might not happen on this day. We've done Christmas on the day after, because that morning it was just too hard. And that flexibility has been a real blessing, and not being so, like, rigid with it like I was in the first few years of being like, nope, this is the day and it must happen on this day, or it's just it's shit. Right.
It just doesn't count.
Right. It doesn't count. It's just null and void.
I love that, because one of the things, as we were talking about setting up this episode, was about traditions. And as Rebecca was kind of priming me for things that you were thinking about, and kind of like your reinvention of traditions, or like you talked about it earlier, like really defining what you were doing and why. They had just been kind of what you did, and now really thinking about the intention behind them. And as people enter into whatever holidays they're celebrating, whether they are these sort of fall winter holidays or other ones, I love that idea of really being intentional, of thinking about what have you been doing that feels really important to carry forward, and why, and what can you do to incorporate new things that embrace that new relationship with a loved one. Like, I really was touched by that plate with the heart crystal on it, and thinking about, like, could that honoring of space help me through Thanksgiving, and thinking about, like, my dad and grandma are there. And as people have said to me, you just have a new relationship with your dad. And I haven't quite understood how that happens, because I can't talk to him. It just feels so unnatural. I feel like a crazy person, I think. I don't know. It just doesn't flow for me. But then I think about, as you were talking, it just like little flashes of like, but I talk about his memory all the time. Like I talk about him and like what he loved, and my boys know what he loved. So like if they do climb someplace high, they'll say like, that would have freaked up Willow out, like he is still present. And so I love that idea of thinking about ways to kind of have a physical reminder of them in the space. We still hang my father's stocking, and I will hang my grandma's stocking this year, because I agree. It's like I can't even imagine looking at our like long ass stocking staircase with a hole in it. I can't even, like, that could not even be a reality for me. So yeah, I just thinking about traditions, that was really helpful.
Gosh, thank you so much, Sandra. And Sandra, thank you so much for coming on today and talking about this. I feel like it's a rich topic, and I know, and I imagine there are a lot of different ways that people move through the holidays. And I think the one thing that I really heard from both of you that feels important to sort of highlight is honoring yourself. So we've named things like, how's everyone else doing? Or, oh, I don't want to bring darkness to the holiday. Or, oh, this was a tradition everyone was expecting me to continue and carry on. It's like, turn towards yourself. It's the put the oxygen mask on yourself first moment that says, what honors me first? And then I can consider how I want to have the holidays look. Do I want it to be that I'm not doing anything this year? Do I want it to be that I'm setting a place at the table? Do I want it to be that I'm putting all the lights up and I'm having a bunch of people over? Like, what feels most honoring to me? And just sort of trusting that if we each did that, we would find our way towards a really authentic expression of the holidays for ourselves in our grief. And I want to like lean into your wisdom for a moment, Sandra, before we do say goodbye or do our sort of check out, from this place of knowing so much wisdom about crystals and herbal treatments and all the things. Like, what are some things we can do for our hearts during the holidays for grief? Like some things that you might offer us.
I'm a big fan of carrying rocks in my pockets. You know that.
Like any good witch. Yes.
Some favorites for me, Apache Tears is one of my favorite crystals for grief. Its name in itself kind of, yeah. Another is rose quartz and aquamarine. So those are my kind of trifecta that I keep in my pocket. Carnelian I throw in there once in a while too. It helps keep the energetic levels of the rest of the crystals vibrating at their optimum frequency, I guess. And then aromatherapy is another one that I lean into a lot. Aromas like frankincense and rose. Rose in particular is just really soothing for the heart. It's very connected with that space, and it's not really overwhelming in a way that a lot of other essential oils can be. So those are kind of my go-tos. But really breath, that's what it all comes down to, is the number one thing in those moments. It's just, I close down my eyes and then I just feel into my body and I breathe. And if it feels like tears need to come, something that you say all the time, Rebecca, is the tears are holy water, and then just let it cleanse it all away. But yeah, those are the main ones. Just breathe, put your feet on the earth, barefoot, get some sunshine.
Yeah, thank you.
So helpful. There's two things that it brought up for me. One, my sister-in-law and very, very good friend came over. I had to obviously attend my cousin's funeral on Zoom. And so she came over so I didn't have to watch it by myself, and sat with me and we watched it. And then she said, Amiga, like, get some rest. And she said, and I know for you, rest is movement. And I was like, thank you, because that is for me. And so I walked the dog, and just to, even though I was in the city, I would have preferred to rush up to the mountains. It was just to move and to feel the air was so helpful. And then the other one, and this actually, the first time I received this was after I had this Rottweiler that I got when I lived in Honduras. And then I brought her home to America, because that's what one does.
Of course.
Brings a Rottweiler home. And so she was like this guardian of mine, and she passed away at 11 or 12. Like, I had her for a long time. And my friend who owns an apothecary here in town gave me a rose oil, and I would just put it on my heart. And my grandmother was passing the same good friend and sister-in-law had brought rose water, and I would just put it in front of her nose. I would just, and I'd like put it on her hair very lightly. And I have like a rose oil roll on that I just put on my breastbone. And there's something just so all encompassing about that smell that feels so beautiful and earthy. And I mean, it's not an earthy smell at all, like it's super flowery, but of the earth. Yeah.
Mhm.
So those, your comments remind me of that. But now I want all kinds of rocks in my pocket.
Good stuff.
Yeah, I know that of rose. I do feel like just naming maybe rose isn't comforting for everyone. So find your way towards, I mean, also that same thing of checking in with yourself, trusting yourself.
Oh, yeah.
But there's some scent or some tea or something that calms your nervous system. And lemon balm is like amazing for me and really can help me feel more peace. Chamomile is lovely. But finding your way towards what is authentic. And yes, I mean, rose is a sort of my first go-to. The rose quartz, the rose essential oil, rose tea I will drink. It's all and burn rose instance. Like I'll do it all. It's just roses, roses, roses.
Rose is a lovely one. But yeah, between just personal preference, not everyone is real fond of the flowery aromas. Frankincense, I feel, has like the same kind of energetic quality to it, but it has just an entirely different aroma and
Yeah.
it can give a little more of a grounding effect to people. But yeah, I mean, just get out there and start trying things and listen to your body and how it lands for you personally, because what works for me may not work for you. And it's just spending the time figuring it out for yourself and providing those comforts and those supports in a way that's authentic for yourself. I used to hate rose. Now it's one of my favorite aromas. So again, revisiting things too, because we all change and evolve as we journey along.
Totally
I
agree.
love that. And for anyone out there who's like less familiar with crystals and essential oils and herbs, we'll definitely give resources that they can access. Your town might have an apothecary. I've found that their staff are so incredibly helpful. That's what happened when my dog passed. I just walked in and I'm like, I have a broken heart and I need help.
Oh,
And they were so wonderful. They were like, here's a tea. And so even if you don't know what to do and you feel intimidated by like a new space or, you know, this sort of new avenue, I've always found that the staff at an apothecary are like so wonderfully ready to help and guide you and give you multiple options. So even if experimenting feels overwhelming, ask somebody and they will point you in multiple directions, one of which will probably lead you to what will help you.
absolutely.
Beautiful. Well, yeah, I guess we can just check out and sort of what we do, Sandra, and I'll invite you to join us this week. We usually check out by just how are you touching your grief this week, which I feel like we've all named, but what's your takeaway or what's a way that you're touching your grief in this moment or carrying forward? And you can start, Andrea.
Sure. So yesterday I had a coffee with a new friend. Like we're starting to become friends. And it's so hard as a grown up who doesn't work in an office building to make new friends. And we sat down and she has had some similar experiences in grief. So she just asked me, like, how are you doing? And I was like, okay, here's my choice. I can lie and be like, oh, I'm pretty good. You know, it's been kind of a weird month. Or I can just tell her the truth and we'll see if she can handle it. She handled it beautifully. And we ended up talking about grief for 2.5 hours and exchanging favorite books and Instagram feeds and like movies and all, you know, podcasts and all kinds of things. And I told her about our podcast and she said, well, how has it served you in your grief? Has it been therapeutic? And sitting down with you two and doing this, it's like the full circle. Like it's both everything I need to receive and talking about it and hearing and connecting. And I think gives me that forward momentum of like, I hope on the other end, there's a listener who this is a resource for them. And so it fulfills so much and keeps my head above water in like a time that feels really overwhelming and like at the bottom of the ocean kind of moment for me. So this is how I'm connecting.
Oh, beautiful. How about you, Sandra?
I feel kind of similar. Like this has been a catalyst to kind of help pull me back towards that with developing the land, and we're building cabin and all of the things that go into establishing a homestead and our future businesses. Get kind of lost in all of that and preparing for this, and today as well. It's kind of helped pull me back to those roots, and I think really help prepare me for next week and into the holidays, which are a challenge. I feel kind of energized in the same. It was a beautiful, like, being able to share my story and pieces of it and also to receive. And yeah, I'm just going to carry all this forward with me.
So beautiful. Same, but I'll say just slightly more to that point. But yeah, I mean, we kind of had taken a break from recording for a little bit, and I mean, just obviously like a lot of things happening back to back. And so preparing for this episode and touching in with the two of you and like the fullness of this conversation is like my heart feels so full. And I am preparing. Also, I'm presenting. There's a kind of a grief retreat that this woman does every year online. And she invited me to give an offering. And last year I did journaling, and she was like, it'd be good if it wasn't exactly the same in case there's some people. And I probably could have just done some different journaling prompts, but what do? I'm like, let's do movement. And so I've been preparing for that and really thinking about, and also wanting to have this like, how is movement not just because I've studied grief yoga, and I feel like sometimes not everyone even knows what yoga is, and not everyone is interested in it, but I know how important movement is. So it's like, how do I do movement? How do I do movement that's accessible if people are in wheelchairs or whatever, so I've just been like working on this, and it's really just helping my heart stay present to all the different ways that we can find our way to resources in grief and all the different things that work for different people, and how to sort of speak in a way that has a universal message but leaves space for like, and you find your way. And that's the only truth, not what I'm saying. Your way is the truth. And I feel like this conversation today went right alongside that sentiment. So I'm feeling really grateful, tearful. I love you both so much. And yeah, thank you.
All love. Yes, more love, just like your sweatshirt says, Sandra. More love.
Yes. I got dressed in the dark this morning, so kind of,
Worked
well
out.
picked. The universe picked that out for you.
All right. Love you guys.
Love y'all.
Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of All the Grief. You can find us on Instagram at All the Grief Pod. And please take a moment to rate our podcast and share us with your friends. We'd love to keep expanding our reach to all the people who could benefit from conversations on grief. Take care.